EEI filing of the export control reform related exports. Back in June, we went over the requirements in the automated export system to prepare you all for the export control reform. And based on a lot of comments that I've gotten in particularly, as well as the leadership at the Bureau of Industry and Security has gotten from you all, what we really wanted to do today is show you practical examples of how to file the EEI information in the automated export system as it relates to the export control reform. Now, a lot of this training you're going to get today is really complements the training that BIS, the State Department, and Customs and Border Protection just completed at the end of September. We conducted training for about 200 U.S. Customs and Border Protection outbound officers in the ports of Baltimore, Miami, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. The Customs and Border Protection did a great job inviting surrounding port officers to these locations. They have really mandated that these officers receive training on the types of exports, the types of shipments they will see or they are seeing as part of the export control reform. You know, you put yourself in their place. Historically, they're familiar with seeing defense articles being exported out of the United States under a State Department agreement, a State Department exemption, or a DSP-5 or one of the other DSP licenses from the State Department. So it's a huge learning curve for them to all of a sudden start seeing exports reported under commerce jurisdictions that are defense articles, parts and components, etc. So this training today complements that because we've already trained Customs on what they're going to see. And so today's training is to show you what you should be reporting so that they understand what they see. And if you differ from providing accurate reporting in EEI, that's when you're most likely at risk for a detention of your export. So that's what we want to go over today. I do want to give you an update. The initial implementation rule became effective last Tuesday, and since then we've had already over 200 export transactions reported into the automated export system related to the export control reform. So we've seen a variety of scenarios of exports that these export control related items have been issued under, such as NLR, license exceptions, the new license exception STA, as well as State Department licenses. So there's a number of different scenarios that companies can report under as their items move from the State Department jurisdiction to the commerce jurisdiction, and we're going to go over all those examples today. In addition to that, I also want to go over the requirements in the export administration regulations for export clearance. So our agenda today is going over the export administration regulations, export control reform, AES reporting requirements. So there's no confusion on when you have to report and when you can't report. And then we're going to go under the practical electronic export information examples. Because we don't have really any candid or template for screens, we're going to use the AESDirect screens for these examples today. Okay, so the first thing I want to go over is a reminder of Part 758.1 of the Export Administration Regulations, and that is when AES filing is required for items that transfer from the United States Munitions List over to the Commerce Control List. And as we went over last time, each of these items are going to be identified by a new type of ECCN, which we call the 600 series ECCN. And the reason for that is the third position character of the ECCN is a 6. So these are all the items that move over from the USML to the Commerce Control List. So the requirement reads that AES filing is required for all exports of 600 series items enumerated in paragraphs .A through .x of a 600 series ECCN, regardless of value or destination, including exports to Canada. This also includes exports under license exception strategic trade authorization. So if you have any of these items that you're exporting out of the United States that are identified on the Commerce Control List as a 600 series item, or it's any type of export under strategic trade authorization, you have to file it in AES. So you may want to take this note. On bills of lading and airway bills in particular, if you have a 600 series export leaving the country, you would never use, for the ones that have paragraph .A through .x, you would never use the exemption statement no EEI 30.37A, which is the Census Bureau's low value AES filing exemption. If Customs would see that on an airway bill or bill of lading for a 600 series item enumerated with paragraph .A through .x, they automatically most likely will detain that. The second thing is you don't want to ever report no EEI 30.36, which is the AES filing exemption for exports to Canada. That as well, in this first bullet up here, is prohibited. The AES filing must occur, okay, if the export is going to Canada, and that's if the item is enumerated, the 600 series ECCN is enumerated with paragraphs .A through .x only. Okay, and the same also exists for anything under the license exception strategic trade authorization, which is coded in the automated export system as C59. Okay. All right, similar to that is another requirement is Part 758.2 of the Export Administration Regulations are the grounds for denial of AES post-departure filing. So if any exporters are on this webinar and you are one of the companies that has approval to file your AES filings up to 10 days or what's soon to be 5 days after departure, you know who you are. Freight forwarders on the call, you may have clients that have this privilege to file an AES up to 10 days or soon to be 5 days after departure. This requirement is saying that exports made under license exception strategic trade authorization or under authorization validated end user, or if any of the items in the export is a 600 series item, you cannot use the post-departure filing exemption, meaning that all of the items that are listed in this bullet must be filed in AES prior to exportation. Okay. The one thing you'll notice about this bullet is it does not say anything specific to the paragraphs of the 600 series. So this would apply also to .Y items as well. Okay, so the less sensitive munitions items that are coming over to the Commerce Control List. So once again, on a bill of lading or airway bill, Customs would not want to see or should not see an exemption no EEI, AES post, that type of citation. Okay, if they see something like that for a 600 series or something described as a military item moving to the Commerce Control List, automatically, most likely they're going to detain that because they should be seeing an ITN, an internal transaction number, because you filed this in AES prior to departure. Okay, the third requirement for export clearance I want to go over is Part 758.6B of the Export Administration Regulations. This is an additional requirement for 600 series items, and it says, in addition to the destination control statement as required in paragraph A of 758.6, the ECCN for each 600 series item being exported must be printed on the invoice and on the bill of lading, airway bill, or other export control document that accompanies the shipment from its point of origin in the United States to the ultimate consignee or end user abroad. Okay, so you notice after the word invoice it has the word and. Okay, so it's not an or. So the commercial documents, bills of lading, airway bills, in addition to the invoice. The reason why other export control document is listed there is if in place of the bill of lading or airway bill there's some other export control document or commercial document, that's what that's referring to. But most exports do leave the country under a bill of lading or airway bill. Okay, so once again with this requirement, again you'll notice that it doesn't specify a particular paragraph, .A through .X. It does include all items under the 600 series, so that would include the .Y ones as well. Okay, so those are three requirements that you really should be familiar with as preparing the documentation. You know, making sure that you do have ITNs, making sure that documentation is correct. And we'll go over examples of that in a little bit. Okay, I just real quickly want to go over the AES editing. We've actually been monitoring since October 15th. Some of the fatal errors have been returned to companies that are shipping out items under 600 series ECCNs, and we've noticed there have been some fatal errors, and the fatal errors really have been caught in these edits here. So first thing is I want you to know of the 600 series items, which are the USML items moving over to the Commerce Control List, which of the license codes in the automated export system are eligible for those items. So we do have our Munitions Control Division, which have been receiving license applications for these items, and as of October 15th they began issuing licenses. So when you're exporting them out of the country in AES, you would use the license code C30 and C31 to report those exports in AES. Now I do want to say that there are 10 600 series ECCNs for this first batch of USML items that are moving over to the Commerce Control List. All 10 of them are eligible for the licenses. So that would include all products of 600 series items. The second is the license exceptions. There are only certain license exceptions that are eligible for the 600 series items exports. They are the temporary license exception, which is designated with AES license code C40. The export administration regulation that you want to check to see if you're permitted to use that for these items is under 740.9. Okay, then there is the eligible license exception for replacement parts or items for repair. That is RPL. That's designated in the AES license codes by code C41. You can read that to determine whether you're eligible to the extent permitted to use RPL under Part 740.10 of the Export Administration Regulations. Then you have Gov, G-O-V, which is under AES license code C42. And to see, once again, if you're permitted to use that, look under the requirements in the EAR, Export Administration Regulations 740.11. And then the other license exception that is permitted is the Strategic Trade Authorization. That is under 740.20 of the Export Administration Regulations, and that is designated in AES as C59. So all 10 of the first category of the first batch of items coming over from the USML to the Commerce Control List are permitted to the extent in the regulations under these license exceptions. So all 10 of them, all products under the 600 series. Now the other designation is C32, which is one of the no license required designations in AES. Once all 10 of the ECCNs under the 600 series are permitted However, the export destination for these should be Canada only. If you go through the decision tree on determining whether or not you have a license requirement, you will notice that there is no X in the box next to Canada for these items, and so you can export them under NLR. One thing we found out today is this also applies to exports to any of the U.S. territories. Puerto Rico, for instance, is not subject to the export administration regulations, but for census reasons, you may have to report it for statistical purposes. And so you would use the C32 designation for an export to Puerto Rico as well for a 600 series item just to meet your statistical filing requirement. Now, some other license exceptions are eligible for the 600 series items, but it's not all 10 of the ECCNs, such as the limited value shipment license exception, LVS, designated in AES with a license code of C35. And you'll see that only 3 of the products, the A products, the B products, and the C products of the 600 series ECCNs are eligible for LVS. So LVS is not eligible for the software under products D and for technology under product E. The last one is technology and software unlimited, designated under AES license code C44. You can find requirements on the use of this and whether you're eligible to use it under 740.13. You'll notice here that the product codes of the 600 series are D and E, which is that's only software and technology. The D represents software, the E represents technology, so that's consistent with its name, Technology and Software Unlimited. So those are the only 4 that can be used. The reason why I'm showing you this is if you get the filing in AES wrong, where you're using ECCNs that are not permitted with certain license exceptions, most likely you are going to get a fatal error, and that fatal error is the ECCN not on approved list. So if you get that, most likely you're using an ECCN and license code match that is not eligible. Okay, it's inconsistent with the regulations. Okay. We'll go into a little bit more detail of these when we go over some of the examples. Okay, so what I want to get into now is really the gist of what we trained the Customs Service on, and that was prior to October 15, 2013. They saw the defense articles, munitions articles, parts, components, accessories, attachments under a DSP-5 in most cases, State Department license. October 15 on, they're now seeing things still under State Department licenses. If companies continue to use their license for a period of 2 years under the grandfathering period, they may see a new State Department license that was issued after October 15th if a 600 series item is used in or with the items on the State Department license. They may see a newly issued Commerce Department license for items on the 600 series. What we just went over is they may also see the 600 series items under the eligible commerce license exceptions. In particularly, we expect to see many of the .X items of the 600 series items reported under strategic trade authorization. There will be some exports under NLR to Canada, especially for those companies who were using the ITAR Canadian exemption prior to their item being moved over to the Commerce Control List. Most likely they will be using NLR to Canada for those items now. And then for the less sensitive items that are moving over from the USML to the Commerce Control List, they will see the .Y paragraph designation DY6, which is under the AES code C60. So what I want to do now is I want to go through all of these 6 examples using AESDirect screens and make sure that if you have an export of any of these scenarios of a 600 series item, that you know how to properly fill it out, so there's no confusion at the port, that you're not, most likely not going to be selected for post-review, post-compliance review, etc. You want to get it right the first time, and that's the best practice I can give you today on that. So let's go through one of them. The first one I want to go over is, this is an example of someone that they do have an item that has moved over from the USML to the Commerce Control List. However, they're taking advantage of the transition period. They have a 2-year period from October 15th to continue to use their DSP-5 or until the DSP-5 expires, if it's prior to the 2-year period. So what you should be doing in this case, and we have a lot of companies doing this, is they're still reporting their DSP-5 designation in AES as SO5. Because they're only in the transition period, they're still moving items from the USML to the CCL. They haven't fully classified all their items. We don't expect to see an ECCN in the ECCN field at this time, not for the company still transitioning. You would report everything else in AES related to that DSP-5 the way you do today. So we're seeing a lot of this, okay? We're seeing these items that had already moved over and companies just holding on to their DSP-5s and reporting them in AES just as they would today. Okay. Second example is after October 15th, if under the delegation of authority, the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls at the Department of State issues a new license, but the company knows that they have a EAR, Export Administration Regulation, jurisdiction item, 600 series item per se, that is used in or with the items that are on this new State Department license. In this case, they would identify the 600 series ECCN in the AES filing. So the only difference between the last screen and this screen is all of the State Department information is exactly the way it was on the previous screen. The only addition here is that since the license was issued to the company and State Department knows that the 600 series ECCN item is used in or with other USML items, they will provide the ECCN of that 600 series item on this AES transaction. Okay. All right, the third scenario. Third scenario is if somebody came in and applied for a commerce license for these munitions, parts, components, accessories, etc. So the Munitions Control Division at the Department of Commerce would issue the license, give you a D number, and then you would just report it under the C30 license code in AES. You would provide your ECCN for the item that you got licensed, and then you'd put the D number for the, and this is the license number that was issued to you when you got the license. Okay, so this is pretty self-explanatory, this one is. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is I'm going to use the servicing and replacement of parts and equipment license exception RPL as an example. Let's say that your item moved from the United States Munitions List to the Commerce Control List, and you can export it now under the license exception RPL. So in AES, from the drop-down window in AESDirect, you'd use RPL. You must provide one of the eligible ECCNs for this, and you saw from our previous screens that all 10 are eligible for RPL. And then in the license field, the license number field, you would actually put the acronym for the for C41, which is RPL. Okay. Now there's a few other things I want to note about this. When you're filing the license exceptions, your 600 series items under a license exception, just remember a couple things. Okay. I'm not showing it here on the screen, but there are other screens that show actually shipment information. The one thing you want to remember is that the license exceptions, if you're using TMP, RPL, FTA, LVS, or TSU, none of those license exceptions are eligible if the destination of the item is going to an arms embargo country. So if you have a 600 series item going to an arms embargo country, the use of the license exceptions are prohibited. Okay, and there's a whole list of them in the Export Administration Regulations. Let me see. I may have the citation for you. Yeah, they you can find them under 15 CFR 740.2, the list of them there. There are 23 of them, and so they're prohibited to use, to export to under a license exception. Okay. Okay, the next example, reporting example, is strategic trade authorization. Now there's a lot of conditions that go with the use of strategic trade authorization. Number one, let's start, before we go into the actual filing screen, let's talk about the countries. With the initial implementation rule, a new country group was created, A5. It's a list of 38 eligible countries for strategic trade authorization for 600 series items. So that's the first thing you want to check when you're shipping to this out of the country under STA. Make sure your shipment screen in the automated export system has an eligible country. It should match to one of the countries, 38 countries under Group A5. Now, the strategic trade authorization is also available to some commerce control list items as well. There's an additional 6 countries that are eligible for the commerce control list items. When you're shipping something out under 600 series, make sure that you are not shipping to one of the A6 countries, those 6 countries that are only eligible for commerce control list items that are not 600 series. Okay, that's one thing you want to do. Once again, STA not eligible for any of the arms embargo countries, just like the other license exceptions. Okay. In addition to that, be familiar with all the conditions that exporters should meet under strategic trade, or must meet under strategic trade authorization, and you can find all of those under Part 740.20 of the Export Administration Regulations. Okay. So in AES, you would provide the license type or license code, which would be C59 for strategic trade authorization. ECCN is required, and then in the export license number field, you would put in the acronym STA. And that's how you report the strategic trade authorization in AES. Okay, the next one is the no license required export. These are specific to Canada. So if you have a 600 series item going to Canada, there will be no X in the box, and you're permitted to use NLR. Make sure you are using the license code C32, not C33. C33 will give you a rejection, and that's because C33 does not require the ECCN because it's AT controlled only, anti-terrorism controlled only. These are actually national security controlled items that are going to Canada, so you must use C32. And you are required again to put the ECCN in the ECCN field, and then the export license number, you put the acronym "No License Required." Okay. One thing I do want to mention on this is, and it's possible to happen, an inadvertent mistake. If a freight forwarder gets a shipper's letter of instruction and they see NLR used and the description of the commodity pertains to a military or defense article, you should make sure that the country is Canada or one of the U.S. territories. Okay, so you don't want to use NLR for a 600 series item destined to any other country. Okay, and if that happens, most likely they're going to pull that one aside as well. All right, the next example is the .Y items. Now, .Y is a little bit different than all of the other paragraphs of the 600 series, and the big difference about the .Y is in the mandatory filing requirements. It is not mandatory if the item is valued under $2,500 or it's destined to Canada. What we've been seeing so far in AES, though, I guess best practices from folks, is that they're reporting it anyway, which is a best practice, even though it's not required. But in this case, if you have an item that's under a .Y paragraph, you would use an AES, the license code C60. You would use the ECCN pertaining to the .Y item. And once again, I don't think I went over this, but not all of the 10 ECCNs that were created as part of this rule do have a .Y. So make sure you're checking the 10 ECCNs and ensuring that there's a .Y for that before you report it into AES, because if you don't, it'll be rejected. And then you'll have to use the acronym DY6 in the license number field when you're exporting this. Now, what I've also included in here in the square, the black square up above where it says commodity description, is the description for aircraft tires. Aircraft tires is an example of a less sensitive item that would qualify under the .Y paragraph of a 600 series item that transferred from Category 8 to the Commerce Control List. One thing that could be a problem is if you are not providing a detailed enough description in that box, or the detailed description in that box sounds to a customs inspector or customs officer that it is a significant military item. So if it's said in their military aircraft landing gear, which would be a .X item, and they saw it with C60, most likely they're going to pull that aside because it's definitely not a less sensitive munitions item moving over to the Commerce Control List. Okay, so those are examples in the automated export system, AESDirect in particular, of how you report the information. Going away from any of this, most likely you're going to get an error code 666 ECCN, not from approved list, if you don't report it in the way I've provided you here. The other thing I just want to share with you also is some examples of how to report this information on the transportation documents. So let's take an ocean bill of lading here. Once again, because the .A through .X items of the 600 series are mandatory to be filed, we should see on the bills of lading and airway bills an ITN from AES. We should not see no EEI 30.37 or 30.36 for those 600 series enumerated with paragraphs .A through .X. So this is a good example of one reported correctly. Under 758.6, the ECCN 9A610 is clearly identified, and it's right above the destination control statement for the Commerce Department. Okay. Some folks have asked which destination control statement do they use. if they're still using their State Department license, but they know that they have ECCNs or they have EAR items that are used with that license. If you're still using the State Department license, you would use the destination control statement for the State Department, although if you have a ECCN item or 600 series item used in or with that licensed commodity, you would also provide that on the ocean bill of lading or airway bill. Okay. And you'll notice right below the destination control statement is the AESITN. This is a good example of one being clearly marked. They're all in one spot. I think Paulette Kolba and I mentioned this at the last webinar. Is one thing that Customs really can't stand is having to look around on the airway bills and bills of lading for this information. They really like it clearly marked, and in this case, they're all in one spot. ECCNs, Destination Control Statement, and ITN are all in that same spot. Very easy to locate. Okay. Second example here is an airway bill. Once again, at the bottom there is the Destination Control Statement, and then the ECCN, 9A610. And then once again, right underneath that ECCN, you see the AESITN. So these are the things that Customs, if they see the description on the airway bill and bill of lading, and it refers to a defense item, and they don't see the ECCN, or they don't see the State Department Destination Control Statement, these are things that may hold up a shipment. Okay. So today was going to be a short one, and I told Cecilia that. So that's really what I wanted to go over today to help you in the transition of the United States Munitions List items to the Commerce Control List items. I'm going to go ahead and answer the questions now. If you have any questions for me after this and you'd like to call, you can use our main number at 202-482-4933. The other thing you can do, which is not on here, I'm sorry about that, is you can send an email to ECR, which is the abbreviations for Export Control Reform, _ AES at bis.doc.gov. And we try to answer those the same day you send out the emails to us. So that's the end of today's presentation. What I'd like to do now is go over the questions. And thank you all once again for attending today's webinar. Let's see. Some of these are not for me. They're actually administrative things, Cecilia, so I will go past these. You are getting electronic copies of the presentation to everybody, correct?
Right.
Okay. Did the transactions that have already been processed through AES cover the full range of possible types of filing? Some DDTC licenses, some FTA, other license exceptions, C60, etc. Good question. We've seen about everything. The only ones we have not seen is the exports under a commerce license for 600 series, and that's probably because they were only issued on Tuesday. So unless the company immediately used that license right away, we have not seen any of those. All the other ones we have. Some of the license exceptions, I don't know if we've seen them all, but we've seen a wide range of scenarios. Okay, just to confirm, C32 for Puerto Rico is for all 600 series, all subcategories, since it is for census statistical purposes only. Yeah, we ran into that this morning. We're tracking the volume of the export control related exports, and we saw one come in, which was an export to Puerto Rico. Now, normally that would go under C33 because it's not subject to the EAR at all, but we blocked it. We block all exports of 600 series to go out under C33 because we do want the ECCN. So the company did have to report it under C32. So that's a good question. If anybody has an export of a 600 series going to Puerto Rico, and it would go under NLR, and you would use C32, not C33. And it is for all subcategories, which is going to be a problem for .Y because if it's C32, that ECCN is going to be mandatory, where in the reg it says it is not mandatory. Okay, so Puerto Rico is a different scenario here because of the requirement. Okay. On an example, is it okay to input the ECCN also? Let's see. If this is referring to if you're in the transition period of a DSP-5, is it okay to report the ECCN also? The answer to that is yes, and we've seen a number of examples of that. We've seen some exports under DSP-5s where the ECCN is already in there, and most likely the company has not made the full transition yet, but they know that some of their items are EAR, so they've provided the ECCN. That's okay. If you're using the .Y license code in AES, which is C60, and you choose to report the ECCN also, which what I've heard from companies is it's a good best practice because they're going to have to report it on the bill of lading or airway bill also, then that is fine as well. That's a good question. Is grace period 2 years also apply to DSP 73s? That's a great question. Let's see. Look through some of my cheat sheets here. The DSP 61s and 73s are valid until expiration. And it says, my notes say that they may be amended after the effective date on a case-by-case basis. So if you want to amend it after the effective date, you have to contact the State Department for that. But those in particular do not say may use up to 2 years. They say specifically they're valid until expiration. Will Commerce License show the decrementation when it is filed in AES? Will we get a return message from AES? Thank you. Not yet. Good question. We are, if you noticed, on October 15th, we issued a new rule, which was called the Commerce Cleanup Rule. And in there, we changed the shipping tolerance requirements or shipping tolerance regulations in the EAR. By doing that, it does allow us to program in the automated export system a decrementation module, but we have not put that program in there yet. Liz, we are looking to do that, and we will, as we move closer to that, we will provide updates to the industry on that. If during the grace period you're allowed to use DSP licenses, why would you also need to enter the ECCN, which now applies? Tim, that's a good question, and I think that's probably one of the bigger questions I've gotten is during the transition period, why is the ECCN required? And it is not. We understand that you're in the transition period. You're continuing to use a DSP license. You haven't switched over. You may not have classified all your Category 8 items over to a CCL item. So in that case, you would just use your DSP-5 license or any of the DSP licenses and report it that way in AES, and we don't expect to see the ECCN field filled out while you're in the transition period. Okay. This is example 1 with the DSP-5 license. If the exporter also provides the ECCN, should we put it? Thank you. Yes, you can do that, and we've seen a lot of that. So even though you're not required during the transition period, if it is provided, we'll take it. It allows us to what that does from a government measurement, from an analytics person, I guess, like myself, is it allows us to know that these items are eventually going to move over to the Commerce Control List. So it does help us a little bit if you do put that in. In what situation would you have to use both destination control statements? Dana, we had talked to the State Department about this about 3 weeks ago, and we don't expect to see that. If you are moving the items out under a DSP license, you would always use the State Department DCS, Destination Control Statement. If you fully made the conversion, you're either using a license exception from us or STA or a commerce license, or if you're even using NLR to Canada, you would then use the Commerce Destination Control Statement. You would not use both. And I'm talking to Customs in the training, they do not want to see both. They'd rather only see one pertaining to the designation of the shipment. Is it possible that we would see 600 series items on temporary license issued by the State Department? My notes say, unlike the International Traffic in Arms, the ITAR, the Export Administration Regulations do not have temporary import jurisdiction and do not impose a license requirement for temporary imports. So, Pam, if you have more if that doesn't answer it enough for you, you need more info, you can send me the email directly on ECR_AEF, and I can get you a better answer on that. I've got a whole sheet on how we're handling temporary imports, and it's probably too long to go on into in an answer to this. What is a 600 series? Okay, this is a good question. The items that historically have been classified under one of the United States Munitions List categories, in particular the first one that was in the initial implementation rule was Category 8 items. Some of them are moving over to the Commerce Control List. Those items that move out of the Category 8 over to the Commerce Control List are going to be designated with a ECCN that has a 6 in the third position of it. And because of that, there's no other ECCNs that have that. We're calling those 600 series items. When Customs sees these, or when the foreign authorities see these, they know that they are items that are military or defense items. The last two positions of the 600 series actually relate to the Vasanar, one of the international regimes, munitions list series. So when they see that, it relates to internationally to another munitions list. So that's what the 600 series is. And you can probably can they go back and look at the June webinar?
If they attended, but I mean, I
yeah. Ashley, you may want to send an email because this was described in previous webinars, and you could probably get more information in those webinars on this. Okay, it says, Jerry, I believe that you advised me that the ECCN would not be required on the master bill of lading, airway bill, or manifest. Is that correct? Perhaps you mentioned it. That is correct. What we've talked about it at BIS, and what we're really looking for is the ECCN and destination control statements on the house bills of lading. What I found out later is that some of the carriers do not have house bills. So in a situation where there is no house bill, if the master's all they have, then that's what it has to be on. So if that's the case, it's got to be on something. If there's no house, it needs to be on the master. But most of the time, we're going to be looking for it on the house bill. If using existing Department of State license for an item that has moved over to commerce, do you need to put the ECCN number on the documents and airway bill? The answer to this, Dana, is if you're currently in the transition mode, you're currently using the existing Department of State license until it expires, or for the 2-year period, you do not need the ECCN on the transportation documents. If you, though, have since October 15th, if you have a Department of State license that has been issued by state, and under the delegation of authority, and that I believe the category for those items would be under 8H. Is that right? Or maybe it might be under category 8X. I can't remember. I'll have to check that. But if it's specifically that, where the ECCN is used within or either with or in the item that's on the State Department license, then the ECCN would be required on the document. Okay. On the .Y items, is the destination control statement and ECCN required on shipping papers? Yeah, Anthony, that's one of the things we did notice, is that it does not specifically say that only 600 series ECCNs enumerated with .A through .X require the ECCN on the shipping documents. It says plainly 600 series. So the answer to that is yes. For .Y items, the destination control statement would definitely be required, but the ECCN also would be required on the shipping documents. Next question, if items are exporting in a consolidation, will the AESITNs be required on the master airway bill, or is it acceptable to be only on manifest? Pam, this is a question you probably want to look in the Census Foreign Trade Regulations and determine where they specifically want the internal transaction numbers from AES listed. I don't think this one specifically in the Export Administration Regulations. We would only give the instructions for the destination control statement. So go ahead and look at there. If you have any questions on what that answer is in the Foreign Trade Regulations, you know how to contact me. Is this webinar recorded?
It is, but...
Okay. I'll let Cecilia handle that. If we have a State Department license under Category 8, but the item is now under Category 19, do we transmit Category 19 or continue to match the license show Category 8? Good question. We did go ahead and add Category 19 to the list of ITAR or USML categories in AES. So yes, you would report as of October 15th, you would report that item now under Category 19 in AES. Will you publish and send a recap of the Q&A session? That one's for Cecilia.
Well, will you do it? If you answer the questions, we'll send it out.
Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Do I have to write them all, or do I just answer?
Just answer them.
Yeah, okay. Albert, yes, we will send those out. Not a problem. Further to your response, you don't think there could be a possibility of a shipment with one item on the DDTC license and a second item moving under STA, then two destination control statements would be needed? Good question. And in AES, you could report them on different lines. Paulette, I'm going to follow up on this one. That's a good one. You know, because AES does allow for companies to use different jurisdiction scenarios on the same shipment, there could be that possibility. And I don't think when we talk to state, we actually provided an example of a scenario like you have. So let me follow up on that and get you an answer back. If you have an export with items under a DSP license and items that fall under commerce, will both DCS be required? That's Dana. I'll check. Same question as Paulette. I'll get you an answer back on that. State Department is allowing companies moving both 600 series and ITAR controlled items to move on an ITAR license. In that case, not transition, then wouldn't it be required to report the ECCN? Yes, that's correct. Not during transition, yes. The ECCN is required to be in AES and on the shipping document. Okay, are the new 600 series information current in the 01/01/13 CFR 15? I would take a look at the rule that was published on April 14th, 2013. I'm not really sure if you go to the Export Administration Regulations on the website that they're in there. They should be, but go to the April 16th, 2013 rule, and you'll see the new 600 series items in there. They're all under the Category 9 of the Commerce Control List. That's where you'll find them all. And then there's a whole group that's going to be implemented again in January. That's the second group of items coming over from the from the USML to the Commerce Control List. And Paige, you bring up a good point. Those of you who do want the new alphabetical index of the ECCNs that also have the 600 series in there, the other day they were actually sent to our webmaster to post. So I believe they may have been posted on Tuesday. If they have, you can now pull that down, and the 600 series will be added to the alphabetical index. Okay, and Paulette helps me on this one. Thank you. If you use the E Code of Federal Regulations, each section has a link to the April 16th revision. So, Paige, if you go to the ECFR, the link back to the April 16th revision will give you the list of the 600 series ECCNs. Okay. I think that's all. All right, thank you all very much. Little bit over an hour. Much more like it. The last one I know was well over 2 hours, so my voice is very good on this one. Once we get closer to the next list of 600 series items that move over to the Commerce Control List, as we get closer to that January deadline, we're probably going to have another short webinar on that to make sure everybody understands what new categories are moving over to the CCL, and we'll probably review similar screens like this just to make sure you're getting reporting right. And then Liz, maybe by then we'll have an update for you also on the future of BIS licenses being decremented. So thank you all very much and have a great day.
The organizer has ended the session.